Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a distinguished scientist, a professor of medicine, a doctor, who's published more than 700 academic papers, supervised 150 odd Ph.D. students. He's won more than 100 academic honors, awards and fellowships. He's the Director General of the Indian Council for Medical Research. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Nirmal Kumar Ganguly.
Thank you.
Professor Ganguly, what is the most interesting, exciting research that the ICMR is engaged in today?
When I took over, I thought that we cannot work on everything and we should choose what we want to achieve. So one of the things which we chose was to choose the Millennium Goals, and that was the reduction of the infant mortality and maternal mortality, and trying to really take in technologies which couldn't reach the people. And in the infant mortality, what I found by all the surveys, that essentially most of the deaths occurs within 6 months of the birth.
But how much of this is really sort of a medical issue and how much is it a social, sociological one?
At the most of the homes in villages, essential cause of the death was lower respiratory tract infection. The diarrheal disease could be tackled with the ORS and other things, but here the decision making and the treatment was not at home. There was no method in which they could refer it to a facility and there they could be treated. So we thought that we will choose 6 worst districts where the infant mortality is highest, and will introduce something which will reduce it by 25% in 5 years. So one of the things which we did, and we had to really work with the ethicist, that we will teach the village workers to inject gentamicin. And it was a really backbreaking thing, because we had to develop around 7 training modules, and modules which the state governments could sustain and train.
But surely these interventions become necessary because there isn't good sanitation, there isn't good nutrition, there are socio-economic imperatives.
The problem was that we have a law about injections, so a policy was needed that anybody who is not licensed cannot inject. So our ethical committee really put in their foot, but we then trained people, we did an exercise and showed them that this could be done. So and their objection was that where we do not have a good weighing machine, how do you calculate, how a village worker calculates how much is to be given? So with these training modules we have achieved that, and this particular program is on. The second module which we tried was that many of them get a bacterial infection and there is an endotoxin and which kills them. So we have now several probiotic, that is lactobacillus manufacturing units around. So, and these could be taken just swallowed and very easily swallowed. Even infants could be delivered this. The third thing which we put in place was certain vaccines which they need. The last one was this, that the Maldives and Sri Lanka and others who have reduced the infant mortality to 13, 14, 16, there the major death occurs because of the genetic disorder. So we chose thalassemia. This was also chosen right in the beginning. And in the thalassemia what we did, that we first mapped, and using most sophisticated tool maps, which are the population which have thalassemia. And when we mapped them and when we found out which are those, then we found out that how many mutations exist, and we identified all the mutations, 23 of them now enlarged to 27. And then we developed a system which will detect about more than 90% of these mutations. This is known as reverse dot plot technique, sophisticated DNA based technique. Then we picked up medical schools in these areas, provided them the equipment, provided them training, provided them centrally synthesized reagents, and put a quality control there. And wherever there was no facility of going to those 6 or 8% which are not detected by this, we put up a referral system. So there they are now referring, and then they are sequenced, and we find out exactly what happens.
Give us a sense of, you mentioned infant mortality and thalassemia now. What is the extent of the problem of infant mortality? What kind of rates are we talking about?
Some of the good states we have reduced it. The prevalence is that we should come down to somewhere around 7, 8, 10, which some of the Asian countries have achieved.
7, 8, 10 per thousand.
Per thousand.
And what is the current rate?
Current rate in the better places it is 68. In the worst places, you know what it is, and so it differs from the state.
Tell us, how bad is it?
In some places it could be more than 100.
That means 1 in 10. What is the prevalence of thalassemia?
Thalassemia differs. There is a range.
What is the range? Yes.
Range is from 2 to 30%. It depends on the population. So what happens that when we teach them the genetic counseling, then they could counsel the parents who who will be having the disadvantaged child, and we have introduced this safe medical abortion with RU486, which you pop some pills and it is done. So we have done training, community training and others. So not only they get genetic counseling, they get this cheap method. Then those who suffer from thalassemia, 20 lakhs rupees to 30 lakhs rupees they have to spend for iron chelators, because iron accumulates, they take a lot of blood transfusions. So we have tried to, now in India the CIPLA has made a very cheap iron chelator. So now the cost will be a fraction, and we are now trying to introduce this, negotiate so that, and train so that this iron chelator could be used. And then those who already have it and will need a bone marrow transplantation, we made the first bone marrow transplantation in CMC Vellore and reduced the cost by 50 times than what it was, they were going abroad to do it. And now we have done one more thing which is very unique. This will be that we have retro-differentiated the peripheral blood cells.
We'll have to explain this in layperson's terms.
Like, the stem cells. Everyone talks about that these are pluripotential cells and they could be turned to anything.
So what are the implications of that?
Implications of this, that you can turn them into red blood cells, you can turn them into cardiac myocytes, you can turn them into neuronal cells, so you can treat Alzheimer, you could make a degenerating heart alive, or you could put the blood, otherwise if you don't have a sibling, and adult bone marrow transplantation was very difficult. So we are doing our first bone marrow transplantation through this method, and this will be one of the first few trials in the world in KEM Hospital, Mumbai.
Dr. Ganguly, we'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. You're watching a conversation with the Director General of the Indian Council for Medical Research, Dr. Ganguly. Welcome back. Dr. Ganguly, if you may move on, you mentioned stem cell research. The issues around stem cell research are fairly controversial, and there has been much discussion and debate on the ethical dimension of it. How do you see the ethical dimension?
In the stem cells, we discourage the clonings of another human being or another and finding out genetic traits which are special genetic traits, but we encourage these kind of things where we create a product out of the stem cells and we create entities which are totally non-controversial by putting in or doing it for bone marrow transplantation, doing it for organs, etc. These could be done, but we need to develop much more to move on to organ, and some of the things are totally banned.
Could you explain to us in layperson's terms as to what a stem cell is?
Like stem cells are the cells which could be really turned into any cells. So
where do they come from?
They come from bone marrow, they come from fetal liver, they come from these organs, and they are the original cells for making muscles, making CNS cells, making in the embryo, and making blood cells and others. They are in the embryo. So one of the major source of the stem cells is the embryo, and these are known as embryonic stem cells. And what is done that in these IVF facilities, in vitro fertilization technique facilities, lot of these embryos or zygotes are thrown away. So the ones which are thrown away, from that the stem cells is collected and then used for turning it into a cell, and sometimes into an organ, and sometimes into a human being also.
So I think there are two issues in the controversy. One is that they are really taken from embryos, and which are potential human beings, and I think there is discomfort about that. You wouldn't
the embryonic doesn't mean embryo. This is just a zygote. From there they could be taken. Embryo formation is different. It is not at that time an embryo, and essentially these were thrown away. But even there was a problem. So we have created a guideline for regulation of in vitro fertilization, so that people are not exploited, and we have created a guideline for stem cell research. The in vitro fertilization guideline has now been finalized. Public debate has taken place. We have finalized.
What is it essentially in simple terms?
It is simply that it talks about surrogacy. It talks about that whether you could do genetic selection or not there, whether you could do sex selection or not, what kind of facility you should have to start it, who could be the donors, whether payment should be, who will be the parents.
Staying with the stem cell and the embryo, what are the fears of misapplied research with stem cells?
At the moment, major fear will be that if we like to change some genetic characteristics to create certain individuals with different traits. So this is one of the major fears.
What is wrong with that?
Then we are playing God actually. We will have the same as Hitler, who wanted a superior race. We need in our society, everyone is important to have a society as a whole, because that is the interesting part of the society.
To what degree do you feel it is in fact possible, both in India and globally, to regulate the pressures, the inevitability of scientific research?
The ethical guidelines we have turned into, which ICMR made, we have harmonized it around the world, and now we are turning it into a regulation, and we have hired lawyers who have put in effort on that, and this is being examined in the Ministry of Health. So if it becomes act, it will be regulated.
Is that inevitable thrust of the search for knowledge, for information, can it in fact be regulated? You will always have rogue states. You had Cuba was doing amazing sort of research which was banned everywhere else in the world. Can you actually regulate it in the long run?
At the moment, the private companies, you can't regulate it at any place, whether it is United States, whether it is anywhere. But now every scientific research, we have learned that if we don't really deal with the ethical questions, we cannot even walk. We cannot do anything. So we have become very, very sensitive about that. Any drug which is released, any vaccine which is released, any new experiment which is done by a company, when it applies for commercialization, it has to go through a strong ethical review. If any research grant which we fund has to go through a strong ethical review.
But isn't the notion of ethics also relative socially? I mean, in the sense that the United States government has a very strong position against anything that involves embryos, the notion of abortion.
They have a problem in abortion, but then there are different issues, like Iran allowed abortion for thalassemia cases. They issued a fatwa. So there are, because of socio-cultural peculiarities, there are certain differences in the ethical values. We take care of that, and that is what I was talking of, harmonization. So if we harmonize these things, get into the picture. Now going back to what exciting thing we are doing, from the infants, we have a major program which is Prime Minister's mission program, Jai Vigyan program, in protecting children of 5 to 15 years age group. This is the group of children, they die of a disease known as rheumatic fever, rheumatic heart disease. Prevalence is 6 to 12 per thousand. And in here, they die, the death rate is 16%. They die at their home. And sometimes 2 or 3 siblings die. If a girl has this, if she marries, she will die when she will bear a child. And when you have a damaged heart, the only thing is a very costly heart operation. and if you, for that there is a waiting list, and it is a disease of the poor, so they can't buy it, so they die. So seeing this, we launched this mission. One was that utilizing available infrastructure, school teachers, students up to class 8, and then a referral. We created a registry of sore throat because it happens with an innocuous sore throat with a bug known as group A beta hemolytic streptococci. And registration of the rheumatic fever, rheumatic heart disease. Those who are rheumatic fever, rheumatic heart disease, they are given penicillin every 4 weeks. So we created a system where they could be given. Then they don't get another infection, so they are protected. Those who get sore throat, we have created a clinical score because diagnostics are very, very expensive, which detects up to 88%. So there is some over treatment, so that they get penicillin and they are saved. And what we are doing, that we genetically typed streptococci, found out that which are the ones which are circulating, and we are going through an effort of introducing a vaccine or 2 streptococci in our country. So this is taking care of the children.
Dr. Ganguly, we'll be right back to discuss the vaccines. Don't go away. A short break. Welcome back to my conversation with Dr. Ganguly of the Indian Council for Medical Research, the Director General. Dr. Ganguly, talking about vaccines, you were meant to launch the first phase of clinical trial for the AIDS vaccine at the end of last year. How is that unfolding?
At the moment, we have 2 entities ready. We have an adeno-associated virus construct and an MVA construct, that is modified vaccinia Ankara construct.
Tell us in layperson's terms.
Adeno-associated virus is a virus which is present in all of our throats, essentially. It is widely prevalent. It has been modified so that it cannot cause any disease or infection, and in its 3 AIDS genes, important AIDS genes have been introduced. And the modified vaccinia Ankara is a pox virus construct which was constructed by one of our ICMR scientists, vaccinia
What is
Ankara.
the potential and the time frame that we might hope for?
So the vaccines are ready now. The modified vaccinia Ankara, we have put 6 genes, all the 6 genes.
So has there been a delay from the December 2003 deadline?
No delay, because we started only 2-3 years back. The whole construct is ready. They have the adeno-associated virus has gone through all toxicology, everything.
So when do you expect to actually do the
2004
first tests?
adeno-associated virus, 2004, MVA 2005.
There is considerable sort of controversy and, shall we say, disquiet on the issue of vaccine trials in particular. What are your sort of precautions that you take?
The precautions which we have taken, that we have been very transparent. We go on informing of the values and whether up to what extent they will be successful.
To the people you got to try them?
To the people, we have several panels. We have a panel of parliamentarians. Mr. Sibbal used to steer that. We have an advisory board of the scientists.
But tell me, if I am a recipient, I participate in this clinical trial, what are my risks and what are my potential?
You have no risk. Only thing that if you receive a vaccine and you get more complacent, you may get into a risky behavior. Otherwise, there is a 0 risk. They go through a very strong toxicology event. If we know that they will not work at all, when they are the best bets at the moment, the challenge studies are done in the rhesus monkeys and others. We do a population antibodies which will be protective or not. We do all of that. And we create a system, like we do a lot of behavioral and social studies which we had launched.
So what is when does the vaccine actually get tested? You put it into a human being, they have no adverse reaction to the virus, then you expose them to the HIV virus and see how they react?
No.
Then how do you ever, when do you get to know it works?
We do the first phase is done in low risk individuals, because we are not doing anything except looking at the safety as well as immunogenicity. The second phase, when we go into a high risk area where the prevalence is high. So we vaccinate a group and we don't vaccinate a group. And we see that, but we do ICT in both of them. We do information and other things in both of them. And then we see that what is the prevalence in the vaccinated group and what is the prevalence in the non-vaccinated group. And however, we tell the vaccinated group that risky behavior may infect him. So we do all the prevention strategies. We also teach them to teach the both groups that use condom, use whatever are the things, necessary precautions, they are taught to the both groups.
What about the rights of the
for the
control group?
The rights of the control group are these, that that those whosoever will be participating in this, if they get infected with AIDS, they will be taken care of. So this is their rights. And those who get vaccinated, we have done very strong informed consents and ethical review, and we are trying to bring in an act so they are protected. Like they will be testing antibody positive.
But isn't something like this, there is criticism that a lot of vaccine trials are moving to the developing world because in some way people here are more willing or able to participate in this?
No, here it is not like that. We have been very conscious about that. So this vaccine is the result of joint participation, very careful selection by our scientific groups, identifying a company in the country, very transparent fashion, who will produce this vaccine, making it possible that this will be sold at a price which will be affordable, looking at the financing of this such product through the global funds and others. So it's not very simple. We are doing all of this.
You mentioned infant mortality, you mentioned thalassemia, you mentioned rheumatic heart disease. There is a great deal in the press about the risk of HIV/AIDS and how that is might be about to explode in India. How serious is the problem?
The problem is serious, but we have tackled it very well, which we should bring it to the country. Recently, the ICMR analyzed the NACO data through very sophisticated techniques. Of the surveillance was enhanced and they were done, and we have seen that our numbers have not really increased as they should increase. We should have had an explosion by this time. 86 we got first infection, and by this time it is more than 21, and this should have really burgeoned. It has not happened. With our limited resources, we have been able to do the parent to child transmission. Now all districts, the thing is in place. We are trying to introduce antiretrovirals, and now those antiretrovirals, when they bring in the count of the virus, if we have a vaccine, they are protected. And one more thing which we are doing in the area of AIDS, that we are developing a very good microbicide. And I feel that this could be the world's best microbicide.
What is a microbicide?
This microbicide is a thing which will kill AIDS virus or other sexually transmitted infections, if it is used with the condoms, both male and female condoms. We don't advocate that this should be done for the treatment. So if it is used with that, then the passing of the infection from high risk population through low risk population to general public will change. And these women who are married monogamous and get infected, 90% of them are married monogamous. They get a victim of their husband because they don't perceive their husband as threat. They will be protected. So with the microbicides, AIDS vaccines, antiretrovirals, appropriate prevention and other strategies, appropriate behavioral intervention, and appropriate surveillance and special situation analysis, and reducing the stigma and removing the stigma and creating a social structures where they will be taken care of when they get this infection, we will do much better in future. We are moving very fast and we are moving really very sincerely in this.
Dr. Ganguly, your most satisfying moment and experience as a researcher in the realm of medicine?
Most satisfying thing in my life has been that we have been able to now introduce products which will empower women on their reproductive health.
Give us one example of a product.
Like the emergency contraceptive, like the safe abortion RU486, like one cyclophem 1 injectable contraceptive where a woman can take her child while they are going for the child checkup and take an injection and nobody knows, and there's a very safe one and she is protected. And the last one I should tell, this is the best one, that the woman used to die because there was anemia, and women used to die because of the bleeding, and they could not be saved because the transportation was very bad, and you have to take permission from your mother-in-law, and the death rate was very high. We have been able to introduce an oral or a vaginal product which will block this bleeding, and a lot of women will be saved.
This is what you've been able to do. In one sentence, what is your ambition? What would you like next before your tenure here runs out?
If my tenure here runs up, I will like to take those vaccines which are not available to children, and we have done a lot. In Calcutta, we are already testing 3. The rotavirus vaccine is being tested already, that was being developed by Dr. Bhan, is being tested all around. A cholera vaccine is being tested, a typhoid vaccine is being tested, the HIV vaccine is being tested. They are all in formulations, all by Indian companies, so that these, and all by alternate financial arrangements and logistics which will be bringing them to people. Then reducing infant mortality, making the mother safe, reducing and some or other improving the environment in a much better fashion, which I have not been able to achieve larger success, but essentially moving towards that.
Dr. Ganguly, thank you very much. This has been a great privilege. Thank you very much.